All right, so I wanted to talk more about, Fury's past fights that he's had, right? And the fact that, people will say that Tyson Fury, the reason he's one of the best heavyweights of today is due to the fact that he has no official losses on his record, right? He's got a bunch of wins, right? And he's never lost a fight officially. I mean, yeah, he has a draw or whatever, but I mean that's not a loss, that's a draw, right? And unlike Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder or Dylan White or the other heavyweights, he's undefeated, right? So that makes him the best fighter in the division today. Now, fair enough if you think that, right? I mean, Fury he doesn't have any losses on his record officially, right? However, what I wanted to talk about is how I personally think that Tyson Fury has some wins that he didn't deserve in his career, right? So, whether it was a, decision that he was gifted or if it was a fight that he just, fouled his way to victory. And, there's some fights that I would say are just controversial that he's been in. So we'll start off with the John McDermott fight, the first one, not the second one. So in that first fight, you had Tyson Fury coming into the fight with, all these physical advantages, right? I mean, he was the younger guy out of the two. He was the taller guy, right? He had the longer reach out of the two, right? And so he had all these, advantages going into the fight. While, John McDermott, I mean, he was on the older side, right? I think he was like in his, he wasn't in his prime anymore or something. He was a lot shorter than Tyson Fury. He was like 6'3" or something. And he was, on the chubbier side. He was kind of out of shape, right? Um, and you expect Tyson Fury to win that fight, but what ends up happening is John McDermott goes into that fight. He basically outworks, and dominates Tyson Fury for the majority of the fight. Yeah, I'd say Tyson Fury maybe won a few of those rounds, right? I think I gave him like, 2 or 3 rounds at most, but I mean, for the majority of the fight, for the majority of the 10 rounds, John McDermott actually, he pretty much won that fight, right? I mean, pretty much schooled Tyson Fury in every aspect. He was actually bringing the fight to Tyson Fury, unlike Fury's other opponents, right? So then what happens in this fight? So what happens is the ref completely robs John McDermott of a win, and he just gives the decision to Tyson Fury, right? And as far as the ref goes, I mean, we all know that, or if some of you don't know, the ref and John McDermott's father actually had a professional boxing fight in their younger years. And apparently what happened is, John's father actually beat the ref in that fight they had. And apparently the ref has been holding a grudge against John McDermott's father, right? I mean, whether he's been holding a grudge, I mean, that's, it's just kind of a rumor. But after seeing him just, give Fury a gift decision win, I mean, I'll believe it. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, that's one of Fury's most obvious losses, right? I mean, he was basically, like, if you're being honest and you're calling that fight how it is, I mean, John McDermott won that fight. Let's be honest, right? And just like in that fight, I mean, a lot of Fury's punches were just slaps or just, they were landing on the back of his glove, which, don't count, right? So, yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, that's a clear loss for Tyson Fury. He should have lost that decision. But, yeah, another fight is the Steve Cunningham fight. I already kind of talked about that, how he should have been, disqualified in that fight. But another fight is the Deontay Wilder fight, the first one. So, in that fight, I mean, you guys know that I personally felt like, Wilder won that fight, right? I didn't think Fury, I didn't think he was doing much in that fight, except just, throwing feints here and there and just throwing this, like, little 1-2 combination or whatever, right? I mean, a lot of people were saying that Fury was robbed that fight, but I really don't think he was. You know what I mean? I think What Fury was doing, he was basically just running a lot of the, in most of the fight, right? And Wilder he was the one trying to force the fight, and obviously, him not knowing how to box, I mean, he wasn't able to really land his mark on Tyson Fury, and whenever Tyson Fury would clinch up, I mean, Wilder had no idea how to get out of the clinches and how to, control the fight that way. So, but aside from that, I still think Wilder won. I mean, if you look at I don't know, if people rewatch it, I feel like, they would realize that it's a closer fight than what people actually, uh, what they thought it was or whatever, right? And the funny thing is, to me, before that fight, I thought Tyson Fury was going to win that fight. And the reason I, made that prediction is because, I thought, okay, well, Fury had a, you know, close fight with Vladimir Klitschko. And I say close fight because let me tell you about the Klitschko fight. So, to be honest, I didn't think that fight was that dominant either by Fury. I really don't think it was. Sure, I'd say it was more dominant than the Wilder fight, right? But, I mean, if you look at that fight, it was the exact same thing as the Wilder fight. It was very, you know, obvious decision by Fury that he wanted to go to the distance, right? He wasn't trying to knock out Klitschko at all. He was, basically running all night, and whenever Klitschko would get close, he would just wrap him up, right? Um, and obviously Klitschko, I mean, he was, not being motivated in that fight, right? Not really knowing what to do against Fury. He kind of he gave most of the early rounds off, right? I mean, I would say he gave maybe the first half of the fight off. But in the later rounds, that's when he started to make a comeback and started to win the last few rounds, but and he even like stunned Fury in that 12th round. He didn't like rock him or anything, but he kind of that's when he was finding his mark, right? But it was just one of those things. It was just a little too late, Fury or Wilder Klitschko, he let some of the early rounds go, so that resulted in him losing. But honestly, like, if they gave that to Klitschko or if they given it a draw, I don't think, like, I personally would not have complained if they did that. Because, I mean, like I said, it wasn't a very good performance by Fury. I mean, a lot of his punches were rabid punches. You know what I mean? They were very, it was very obvious that, they either landed on the back of his glove or, on his wrist. And yeah, and, Fury was just, he was jumping on Klitschko's back and just throwing all these illegal punches. And if they gave it to Klitschko, I wouldn't have, had a problem with it, right? I mean, obviously it was a bit boring fight. I wouldn't say it was dominant by either end, but yeah. Anyway, with this Wilder fight, so going into the Wilder fight, I thought, okay, well, Fury had somewhat of a close fight with Klitschko, and Klitschko is obviously a better fighter than Deontay Wilder. So I said, okay, well, Fury should win this fight, and he should win convincingly. But instead what happens is you have Wilder trying to force the fight instead of Fury, right? And he's the one, trying to go for the knockout, and he's able to land the harder punches in that fight, for most of the rounds. And, he's even able to get 2 knockdowns. One of those knockdowns, which almost knocked him out, right? So I personally thought Wilder won, but I wasn't. But look, I was glad that they made the fight a draw, right? I'm glad they didn't give it to Tyson Fury. I didn't think, they didn't. I don't think Tyson Fury deserved to get that decision win, right? Because I mean, just running and holding all night. I mean, that's not how you take a title from a champion and become champion, right? I mean, that just shows that you're just looking to go the distance without putting in much effort, right? And a lot of people will say, oh, but Muhammad Ali had that same sort of style, right? Well, yeah, but Muhammad Ali, he wouldn't run as significantly as Tyson Fury does, right? And he was able to dance around his opponents, and stay in a range where he was still able to, land on his opponents, right? And unlike Fury, Muhammad Ali, he had power, right? He has power in his punches, so he was able to get those knockouts. Fury doesn't, and instead of, like, pushing the pace. He just runs. That's all he does, and that's what he did in the Wilder fight. And as far as the second Wilder fight goes, so I personally thought Wilder was going to win that fight, and the main reason I felt that way is because of, you know, like I thought, okay, well, out of the two, I think Deontay Wilder will make the most adjustments, right? Because Fury has shown not to really, he hasn't really done that in his career, right? Because, he didn't show up in better shape than he was in the Klitschko fight. So I thought, okay, Wilder should win the rematch, But what ends up happening is Wilder comes into this fight basically out of shape, right? He comes in with built-in excuses with, the whole costume fiasco and the whole, glove gate situation. And you have Fury getting the TKO win, right? But the sad thing about that fight is that Fury didn't even look that great, getting that win, right? Like, he really didn't, in my opinion, like with his other fights, in this fight, I think he went into the mindset he went into this fight with the mindset of, okay, I'm gonna lower the amount of running I do in this fight, right? And I'm gonna up the ante on the amount of holding I utilize in this fight. And that's exactly what he did. He rushed Wilder, he was holding him, and he was smacking him behind the head, he was elbowing him, he was using all these dirty and illegal tactics in the fight. And, obviously, no one really capitalized on it and, told Fury that he shouldn't be doing this stuff. And they just gave him the win that way, and that's that. So it was another one of, it reminded me a bit of the Steve Cunningham fight, you know what I mean? Fury, he didn't deserve to win that either, it should have been a no contest at least. But they gave the decision to Tyson Fury, So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Fury, he has a lot of controversial fights, and he has some fights that I personally don't think he should have won, right? Like, the McDermott fight is an obvious one. The Steve Cunningham fight is an obvious one. The Wilder one I can kind of understand, and I'm not too upset with a draw. And the second Wilder one, that should have been a no contest at least, let's be honest, right? I'm not too forgiving of Wilder, though, because, he came into the fight out of shape. He was, making all these excuses about his costume after the fight, so, I'm not, saying he's innocent, but I'm just saying it was still a dirty fight by Tyson Fury. So, yeah, I'm just pointing out these things that not a whole lot of other people are pointing out, right? Like the fact that he fouled his way to victory in a Steve Cunningham fight, how he got outworked by John McDermott. People complain, Anthony Joshua got knocked out by a fat Mexican. Well, Tyson Fury got dominated by, an overweight John McDermott. So, if you want to say that, then just, show the same energy. You know what I mean? But, yeah, I don't know. It's not a whole lot of people are talking about these, right? And they're just giving Tyson Fury these wins, so I don't know what to say, man. It's yeah, I don't. There's a lot of fights that Fury, he fights very tactically, right? He fights in a way where he'll just get the decision, or look to go the distance and get the decision that way, or he'll just throw these illegal moves, like he'll hit you behind the head, he'll headlock you, he'll do all these things to try to do damage to you rather than actually putting up a clean fight, right? And putting up a dominant fight.